Animals get food from external environment, and then they have two problems because they have to use this food for the production of energy in the cell. First problem is to enter the food into cell, and for entry it requires digestion of the food into smaller particles, that is done by digestive system. The second problem is the in animals it requires sufficient supply of oxygen to metabolize these food particles in cells for aerobic respiration. So the and elimination of carbon dioxide that is produced during this aerobic respiration. This process of gas exchange is called as external respiration. The animals have the five main types of respiratory surfaces, or we can say five modes of respiration. These respiratory surfaces and mode of respiration are the surfaces are cell membrane through which the mode of respiration is simple diffusion, and the animals they may have trachea, the tube-like structures for the exchange of material gases, and then integument through the skin, that is again diffusion, and then through gills and lungs. So this uh, cell membrane, it is present in protozoans. So protozoans are unicellular organisms, and these cells they directly exchange everything with their environment, including oxygen and carbon dioxide, directly through diffusion. And then the animals like insects, they have a tracheal system, tube-like system. These tracheal system they open uh, outside of the body through small pores that are called as spiracles. These spiracles they then enter into the tracheal trunk, and this tracheal trunk then give rise to small branches that are called as tracheoles. So tracheoles they reach each and every cell, and they are about 2 nanometer distance to each and every cell. So there is exchange of gases directly between cells and the tracheole, and then these carbon dioxide, for example, it enters from the cells into the tracheoles, and then they go to the tracheal trunk and then go out of the spiracle, out of the body. Oxygen goes from spiracle into the tracheal trunk, and then into the tracheoles, and then to the cells. And this exchange between cell and tracheole is due to diffusion. And then the flight muscles of these insects they contract, and they help to exhale the carbon dioxide and inhale oxygen through these tracheal system. Then there are organisms that use their integument directly for the exchange of material. Integument is the skin. So their integument or skin is a simple thin layer surface. So oxygen can go directly into the body, and carbon dioxide can go out of the body through the skin surface. So this occur in hydra and in flatworms because the body is flat, so surfaces are larger for the exchange of gases. And then the animals they may have gills for the exchange of the uh, gases. For example, the crustacean and mollusks, and they have gills, and the fishes they also have lungs for the exchange of gases. And then there are lungs in the uh, amphibians and a few of the fishes and reptiles, birds and mammals for the exchange of gases. The aquatic organisms are, with reference to respiratory system, are unimodal, bimodal, or trimodal. Unimodals are the organisms that may use either gills or their skin or cutaneous surfaces for the exchange of gases. Bimodal organisms may use both gills and cutaneous surfaces, and when bimodals are elaborated, they found that they are actually trimodal. They are using gills, cutaneous surfaces, and lungs for the exchange of gases. And we know the trimodal organisms, they may be a link between aquatic organism and terrestrial organism that are using only lungs. For example, the birds, mammals, and reptiles, they are terrestrial organisms that are only using lungs. So that is an evolutionary link between aquatic and the terrestrial organisms. So if we see cutaneous exchange, that is occurring in almost all organisms that are using either gills or lungs, and it is supplementing the uh, respiration. But the cutaneous exchange is more elaborated in amphibians. Amphibians, they have their skin are the epidermis, and beneath their epidermis and dermis there are in dermis there are the networks of capillaries, blood vessels, and they are giving rise to these capillaries. So there is exchange of uh, oxygen and carbon dioxide directly through diffusion and convection. So the oxygen is coming into the capillaries, and carbon dioxide is going out of the capillaries through epidermis or the skin or cutaneous surface. So these cutaneous surfaces or skins, they are also lined by mucus. So mucus is lying on these, making it slimy for the exchange of gases, so that the gases, they get mixed in that, get absorbed in water medium, and then they are absorbed into the blood vessels. So the uh, amphibians, frogs, they may exchange about 25% of the gases through the cutaneous surfaces, while there are few other organisms like the lungless salamanders. They don't have lungs. They exchange almost uh, all the uh, oxygen and carbon dioxide through their cutaneous surfaces, and uh, they also have the uh, exchange of gases through buccal cavity. The fish and the amphibians, they have gills for the exchange of gases, and here we can see a fish that has gills covered by gill operculum or gill cover, and the gills are made up of gill arches, and then these gill arches, they give rise to gill filaments, and gill filaments, they give rise, they have small uh, projections that are called as lamella. So these lamella, they have capillaries in them. So blood vessels that are entering from gill arches into the gill filament, and they are giving rise to the capillaries in gill lamellas. So the gas exchange, it occurs in the gill lamella. So water is flowing opposite direction to the flow of blood for an optimal exchange of gases. How this happens? Because water is entering from mouth, and it is going to on the gill arches, and from the gill arches to the gill filaments, and to the opposite direction of blood flow in lamella. Here we see how this opposite direction of water to the blood flow helps for the optimal exchange of gases. For example, for oxygen, the portion of the capillaries that are making arteries are first are coming in contact with the water first. Here we can see the water entered, and now the part of capillaries that are making arteries, they come in contact with water first. This arrow is showing that the water is coming in contact with the blood in capillaries that are making arteries. So we know the arteries have blood that has high level of oxygen, but it is still less than the oxygen concentration in water. So because of diffusion, the oxygen enters into this arterial blood, and then the water moves forward and the level of oxygen decreases here in blood, and same is for the water because few of the molecules have entered already into the blood here. So the level of concentration of oxygen in water is decreased, but in the blood vessels or capillaries that are near to veins, they have less oxygen concentration. So still oxygen can flow from the water into the capillaries, and then when it reaches to the water reaches to the veins or the capillaries near veins, the oxygen concentration in water is reduced drastically, but the oxygen concentration in veins is very less. So again, the exchange is possible between water and veins. So oxygen can enter through diffusion into the veins. So if there would be no counter current exchange method, then most of the oxygen would be lost in water. So same counter current exchange is also helping for the removal of maximum carbon dioxide, because when water comes in contact with arteries or the capillaries near arteries, the water has no carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide from this arterial blood or the capillaries near arteries enter into the water, and later on this water has now carbon dioxide in it, but the venous blood, it has more carbon dioxide, so still carbon dioxide can diffuse into water. So most of the carbon dioxide will be removed from the blood. So the gills and the counter current exchange in gills help to remove water carbon dioxide and help to uptake maximum oxygen from water in fishes and amphibians. Lungs are internal sac-like organs, and the terrestrial vertebrates, they have lungs that are comprised of one or more blind-ended pouches in which air is either forced or it is drawn. These pouches are called as alveoli, and the epithelium of these alveoli is highly vascularized. It is thin and it is suitable for the exchange of gases. And these pouches, they are the site of exchange of the gases between the between the lung air and the and the blood. However, the blind-ended sacs, they limit the efficiency of exchange of gases between blood and the lung air, and only because only a portion of the air is replaced from the lungs with every breath. So all of the air is not going out, and not all the air is coming into lungs is fresh. So only a portion is drawn out of the lungs. So in most of the alveoli there is the older air present. So that is, there is a little exchange of the oxygen and carbon dioxide between the air and the blood. But the birds, they have an exception. They have developed the air sacs with the main lungs. So these air sacs, they help to uh, do a double ventilation. So we'll see it later. In the case of mammals, only 25% of the air is exchanged for oxygen and carbon dioxide, and in case of birds, 90% of the oxygen and carbon dioxide is uh, exchange between blood and the uh, lung air. The vertebrate lungs evolved with the evolvement of the swim bladder in fish. The swim bladder is an air sac-like structure that is present just above the digestive tract of the fish, and evidences, they show that both the lungs and the swim bladder, they evolved from sac-like lungs in primitive fishes that were ancestor to both the amphibian, reptile, birds and mammals and the modern fishes. These primitive fishes, they had the sac-like lungs or the pouches that were attached to the ventral side of their tubes, and that is the pharynx, and they may be used for the gaseous exchange organ, um, for the fishes that may not get enough oxygen from their uh, gills, and the fish, they may come to the surface of the air and breathe, take air into these lung-like sacs, and they were providing supplementary ventilation to that of the uh, that is the primary ventilation through gills. They were just adding up to that portion. So there was two type of evolution, that is the sac-like structure that is working as a swim bladder. It is dorsal, now dorsal to the digestive organ, and then there is evolution of the lungs that are ventral to the uh, digestive organs. The organisms that have more metabolic rates, they have larger lungs, complex lungs, and the surface area in those lungs is highly increased due to presence of very well defined pouches or alveoli. So we can say the evolution of lungs is related with the evolution of the metabolic processes. The movement of air, that is in bulk form, from outer environment into the lungs and then out of the lungs, that process is called as breathing or ventilation. There are two modes of ventilation that are being used by vertebrate animals, that is positive pressure system pumping and negative pressure system, that is suction. So positive pressure system is being used by amphibians and few of the reptiles, that is the pumping air into the lungs, and negative pressure system is used by most of the reptiles, all of the birds and the mammals. They suck air into their lungs. In case of positive pressure system, that is the pumping system, the air is taken into the mouth of the amphibian by opening mouth, that is by lowering the lower jaw, and then air enters into the mouth. When glottis is closed, it is not going into the lungs. So after taking into mouth, the glottis is then opened, and then the already air present in lungs comes out over the air that is now taken into mouth. So the fresh air is in mouth, and the air from lungs is going out above the fresh air. So when this air goes, the older air goes out, this fresh air is then pumped into lungs by using muscles. So the at that time mouth is shut, and the fresh air went into the lungs. It is pushed into lungs. Here we can see the mouth is shut, and this makes the mouth cavity small so that air is pushed into lungs. And then the glottis get closed in next cycle, and then the fresh air again comes into the mouth, and then glottis gets open, the older air moves out above the fresh air and goes out, and then the mouth is shut, and again the mouth cavity becomes small and air is pushed again into lungs. So this is the whole process of the positive pressure breathing. For this process, the muscles of the mouth and pharynx, they create a positive pressure to force air into the lungs. However, in other organisms, in most of the reptiles like snake, lizard, crocodiles, they expand their body cavity with a posterior movement of the ribs to ventilate the lungs. This expansion, it decreases pressure in the lungs and draws air into the lungs. That is by creating negative pressure. So in case of the turtles, the ribs are part of shell, so they cannot move the ribs forward or backward, so they exhale by contracting muscles that are used to force the visceral organs upward, and that compress the lungs from the uh, ventral side toward dorsal side. They compress their visceral organ so that the uh, air the lungs, they are compressed and air goes out. And for inhaling, they contract muscles so that the visceral organs, they go down, and the visceral cavity, or the body or we can say the thoracic cavity, it becomes larger, so that there is a negative pressure by which they take air into lungs. Birds and mammals, they also use negative pressure system to ventilate their lungs. And birds, they have high metabolic rates because they fly, so they need a lot of oxygen. So they have various adaptation in their and modification in their system. And the birds have developed one-way flow of gas through their lungs. We'll see it later. That makes birds' lungs more efficient. In mammals, the inspiration and expiration, that is the inhalation and exhalation, they are again dependent on the intercostal muscles of the ribs, and it is by the help of diaphragm. So we know the diaphragm is a muscular structure that is dividing or separating thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity, and when diaphragm is in relaxed position, it is like a dome. and when it is contracted, this dome is decreased. It becomes, the diaphragm become flat. So the muscles of diaphragm, they contract, and the intercostal muscles of the ribs, they also contract to raise uh, the rib cage, so that the volume of thoracic cavity increased, and the um air is drawn into lungs due to negative suction pressure. And when the person has to exhale, the intercostal muscle, they relax, so that the rib cage goes down, and the diaphragm, it also relaxes, and the volume of the thoracic cavity decreases, and this decrease in volume pushes air from the lungs out. That is the exhalation. That is called as a negative pressure system. That is the suction system. In reptile, amphibians, and mammals, the gases enter from respiratory organs into lungs, and they come on the same path and go out. But in case of birds, the air enters into the respiratory system from one way, and they go out from another way. So there is only one way flow of gases. That is possible by presence of air sacs. There are anterior air sacs that are above lungs, or they are uh, present before lungs, and then there are posterior air sacs. So the air, when birds inhale, the air goes from trachea into the posterior air sac first. They bypass lungs, and most of the gas goes into the posterior air sac, and a little gas also enter into lungs. Lungs are the place where the alveoli are present, and the exchange of gases takes place in there between blood and the air. So the air that enter into posterior sac, then it is pushed into lungs, and then from the lungs it is pushed into, after exchange of gases, this air, remaining air, it go, and carbon dioxide, it is pushed into anterior air sac. Now this interior air sac, it has the connection with trachea, and then this air is exhaled. So these anterior and posterior air sacs, they are dependent on the uh, relaxation and contraction of the muscles. So there is no gas exchange in air sacs, that is the interior and posterior sac. The gas exchange only takes place in the lungs. The air sacs are only providing double ventilation. We can say the air is entering from trachea into posterior air sac, and then into lungs, and then into anterior air sac to go, then finally to release into the environment. These anterior and posterior air sacs, they are sometimes called as abdominal air sac. The posterior air sacs are called as abdominal air sacs, and the anterior air sacs, they are called as the thoracic air sacs. And in anterior air sac, there could be a number of pairs, and they could be called as anterior thoracic air sac and posterior thoracic air sacs. So the function of these air sacs is just to the storage of gases before ventilation. So exchange of gases, that is the oxygen and carbon dioxide, it takes place only in lungs. That is how the birds, they are exchanging about 90% of the oxygen between the lung air and the uh, blood. but we saw in mammals it is only 25% of oxygen being exchanged. The gas exchange takes place in the lungs, and these lungs they have tunnel like structure that are called as parabronchi, and within these parabronchi there are a lot of capillaries and where the exchange of gases takes place. When birds have to inhale, the muscles around air sacs around the thoracic or anterior air sac and posterior or abdominal air sac, these muscles they contract, and by contraction of these muscles the thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity they increase in size so that the air sacs they become fully open. That produces a negative pressure that sucks air into the uh, trachea, and then this air and then into the posterior air sac, and the air present in lungs it is sucked into the anterior air sac. At the same time air is entering into posterior air sac because it has connection with the lungs also, so a little amount of air also enter into lungs. And then when the birds have to exhale, the muscles around these air sacs get relaxed, so the uh, volume of thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity decreases. That decreases the volume of the posterior air sac and anterior air sac, so that the air from posterior air sac enter into lungs, and from the anterior air sac it a little amount of air also enter into lung, but rest of the air goes out into trachea and goes out. Why I called it as a double ventilation? Because the air is entering into the lungs, a fresh air is entering into lungs, and it also entering into posterior air sac, and the air that is going out from the anterior air sac, a little portion is also going into lungs for exchange of gases. So exchange of gases is only taking place in, and why I called it as a one-way route, because in case of human and other vertebrates, the air enters into lungs and then it goes on same path to go out. So there is a lot of mixing of the old and new or the fresh air. So there is not a complete ventilation. In case of birds, the old air is going from thoracic air sacs or anterior air sac into trachea and going out completely, and the fresh air is going into lungs when the old air has gone out into anterior sac. So there is a great ventilation into the bird lungs. And then other is, in case of double ventilation, it is that air that is going out it may go into lung, a little amount is also going into lung, so there could be efficient exchange of gases.